Hello, I'm Audrey Pitcher, and you're listening to Assembly Update. We're here with Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz from the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx. Assemblyman, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, good morning. It's a great morning.
Now, we are currently in the midst of budget, of course, and one of the things that we are currently looking at is the various joint budget conference committees. Now, you are co-chair of the Public Protections Joint Budget Conference Committee. Can you talk a bit about what the discussions are like going on in there?
Sure. I think there are 10 joint conference committees dealing with different areas of the budget. There's one on education, one on higher education, health, and so on. So our subcommittee, which is co-chaired by myself and my Senate counterpart, Senator Myrie, deals with areas, just what it says, public protection. That really means criminal issues. We're dealing with the budgets for essentially a laundry list of state agencies, and because there are several, I thought I would read them rather than try to do it from memory. So the areas of the budget that we deal with include funding for the Office of Court Administration, Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, that's jails, Division of Criminal Justice Services, Division of Homeland Security, Office of Indigent Legal Services, the Department of Law, that's the Attorney General's office, the Commission on Judicial Conduct, the Division of Military and Naval Affairs, Office of Prevention of Domestic Violence, the Division of State Police, and the Office of Victim Services. So those are all very important state agencies. And how much funding are they going to get in the current budget? Well, that's the subject of the budget negotiations, and our joint conference subcommittee deals with those particular areas. There's a lot of agreement among the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor, but there's also some disagreement. So the purpose of these committees is to iron out those differences in order to have a negotiated budget by the deadline, which is the end of March, April 1st. And we're dealing with a lot of areas where we want to see funding for our priority areas.
And can you talk about some of those priority areas where you think more funding is really needed?
Sure. We're talking about, again, looking at this laundry list, but this is a very important list. It's about public safety, and so we're talking about security in the subways and commuter hubs, supporting community violence intervention programs, funding rape crisis centers, expanding resources for gun violence prevention, I should say, parental representation in hearings that involve children, defense services, and we also want to invest funding in alternatives for incarceration, residential stabilization for formerly incarcerated individuals, capital improvements for volunteer fire departments, loan forgiveness for prosecutorial and defense attorneys. And these are things that, taken together, add to public protection, add to public safety, and so these negotiations are really very important. And because the Senate, the governor, and the Assembly don't have exactly the same priorities, there are some differences, and we need to iron out the differences, and we want to maximize the funding for the areas that we think are important and that the people in New York think are important.
Definitely. Now, another sort of controversial issue in the budget has been the idea of film tax credits, which provide tax credits for studios and whoever is filming in New York. I believe you recently visited a Netflix studio that is taking advantage of that in Brooklyn.
Yes, I mean, this is obviously another area of the budget. For a number of years, the state has provided tax credits for the film industry, we'll call it. And that industry, entertainment industry, is among the highest producers of tax revenue for the state and for the city of New York, certainly. I mean, if you ask me what are the top three contributors towards the city's tax revenues in terms of industry, it's the entertainment industry, it's the film industry, it's Wall Street, and all of these things taken together comprise a huge part of the revenue that we get in order to pay for the expenses both on the city and the state level, to pay for the police and the firefighters and teachers. So we were invited to this particular studio in Brooklyn And obviously, they have an interest in seeing that this tax credit continue. But so we saw the little bit of a filming of a Netflix series, which I happened to watch. But more importantly, their pitch, and they are correct, this industry, whether it's TV or whether it's movies, they provide, I didn't mention tourism a few minutes ago, did I? Tourism. Anyway, they provide a lot of tax revenue and business for the city. I mean, think about it. When they come here, they're not only using local businesses for some of the construction of sets and stuff, but also the people who go to the local stores, to the diners. I mean, there's like a lot of things that the average person doesn't see. Now, in our area, we very often have streets, parking suspended on certain streets because Law and Order or Power or other TV shows and sometimes movies are filming there. And it annoys people. There's no question it annoys people. And sometimes people complain to me, and I say, listen, there are very few things that are more annoying than not being able to park. But I said, when you look at the larger picture of how much it contributes to our city, and if we didn't have those revenues, how would that affect the budget and what we're able to do? So I think all that, it's a big plus for the city. Plus, having the city of New York as the setting for TV shows or movies, that in and of itself brings in more tourism for the city. I mean, New York is the #1 city on the planet. We all know that, but this contributes towards that. So, yeah, it was kind of neat seeing the studio, but I think the important thing is knowing that this industry produces so much for our city. And some people say, well, why should they get such big tax breaks? And they are big tax breaks, no question. But you have to look at the books and see, are we gaining much more than we're giving away? And I think the answer is yes, we are gaining a lot. So yeah, and I think we need to have some movie studios built in the Bronx.
Now, you mentioned tourism a moment ago. Would you like to talk a bit more about how that is impacted by these filming locations?
Yeah, people, I mean, one of the things, I mean, there are so many things that attract tourists to New York. And, it's not just the Statue of Liberty and, Broadway and, stuff like that. It's also this. People see a show like The Night Agent. That was the show that we had seen, they showed us. Being filmed in New York, and this season there was like a huge scene at the United Nations, for example. That stuff interests people, and people like to see where all these places are. In my own district, it's not only the filming that takes place, at the Tibbet Diner on Tibbet Avenue. It's also filming that takes place at Lehman College, at Wave Hill, at places that are familiar to people. But also larger places that are more well-known beyond our own areas. People come here for that. New York is like a magnet that brings people from all over the place. And I know all these naysayers are saying, New York is in decline. I don't believe that. That people are leaving New York. Yeah, a lot of people left during the pandemic. They're coming back now. Our population is growing again. So there are a lot of things that we need to do better, certainly in the city, for sure, but I think overall the trend is that we're going to be growing again, and why not? Everybody wants to be in New York.
Absolutely, and tourism is also, in that case, a public protection issue, correct?
Well, first of all, the more people on the streets, the safer the streets are. But beyond that, the more tourism we get, the more revenue we get. We could maybe afford to pay for the cops. We need to have more cops. I think most people agree, except people on the fringes, perhaps. And how do you pay for all that? Well, we have to generate tax revenue. And as I said earlier, tourism, the film industry, Wall Street, I mean, and other things too. This is what brings in the revenue that allows us to afford to do the things we need to do certainly in the Bronx. So yeah, I think we got to continue to see New York grow, and we just got a lot of work to do. Part of it is budgetary, and we have to make sure we put our money into the places that make the most sense.
Absolutely. Now, looking forwards towards the budget, what are you anticipating for the rest of the week?
Well, these conference committees will be continuing to meet, and then mostly it's going to be the members and staff, particularly staff, working to iron out differences so we can come to a conclusion. And while we're doing all that, we're also doing our regular work. Excuse me.
No worries. Now, you mentioned some people have said that New York is in decline. People have criticized sort of the perception of New York as a less safe city, but you would dispute that claim, especially with regards to populations increasing.
Yes. Is crime too high? Yes, of course it's too high. It's always too high. We don't want any crime. For many years, crime was in decline, and the lowest crime numbers we ever had, probably in my lifetime, and that goes back a ways, was during the de Blasio administration. I know some people will say, no, he was no good. The lowest crime numbers were during the de Blasio administration. And when the pandemic hit, that's when crime started going up, and it went up significantly, nowhere to near the levels that we had in the late 80s and the 90s, nowhere near that. But for a whole generation of New Yorkers, this was the highest crime we had in their memory. And it's still too high, but it's been going down for the most part in the past couple of years. I mean, murders, which is like the ultimate crime, has certainly been declining, and most categories of crime are going down, but not everything and not as much as it should. The subways are safer than they were a couple of years ago, but you know, we read about these high-profile, horrible crimes that have taken place on the subway, and that makes people feel unsafe. And so even if crime is down, and it's down by a decent amount, but not by enough, if people think it's not down, people's perception is very important, and that has to be turned around. So we still have work to do in that area, a lot of work.
Well, it definitely sounds like those are all excellent reasons to invest more funding into public protection, and hopefully that's what we'll be seeing in this year's budget. So thank you very much for joining us this week. We look forward to talking with you next week as well.
Okay, hopefully we will have made good progress on the budget.
We can only hope.